Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today, we are taking a deep dive into an area of science that is, um, well, maybe more politicized and culturally overloaded than almost any other.
And that's evolutionary biology.
Specifically, the study of sex.
Yeah.
And the book that's going to be our guide for this analysis is the really powerful and deeply researched Phallacy, Life Lessons from the Animal Penis by Emily Willingham.
And what Willingham dissects is what we call the crisis of interpretation. It's the central question. Why is it that seemingly objective biological facts?
Fact about gender reproduction.
Exactly. Why are they so consistently weaponized? I mean, you see it everywhere, right? In political debates, on internet forums, even in, popular self-help culture.
Oh, absolutely. Biology is brought up to justify existing social hierarchies, to cement these really tired gender stereotypes.
And to rationalize structures of dominance in human society. It's the ultimate intellectual shortcut, isn't it? The appeal to nature.
That is the core tension.
Yeah.
When someone makes an argument, whether it's about aggression or, say, social roles, and they just end it with, well, that's just natural behavior, that person is almost always relying on a very narrow and usually very biased scientific narrative. It's often drawn from just a handful of species.
So our mission today is to pull that system apart. We're going to examine how these scientific stories, particularly the ones that are so centered on the male sex organ and male agency,
Right.
how they've shaped our cultural assumptions about gender and behavior.
And I think it's really crucial to stress something here at the top.
Yeah.
We are explicitly focusing on how these evolutionary claims are interpreted and, more importantly, misapplied.
Yeah.
We are not here to pass moral judgment on human or animal behavior itself.
No, this is an analysis of the system of interpretation. We're looking at the intellectual system that has, by focusing so obsessively on one particular organ, created this profound systematic distortion in our entire understanding of nature, of sex, and, of human social potential.
We are going to try to decouple the biological reality of that organ from the enormous cultural, historical, and psychological baggage it carries.
And I think the first step for that is understanding who wrote the definitive guide to this decoupling.
Right. Let's talk about the author.
Okay, so let's unpack this with the author herself. Our deep dive is built around the work of Emily Willingham, and she's a real powerhouse in science communication. She's trained as a biologist.
It was so important.
Yes, and she's a prolific writer who really specializes in cutting through all the noise.
Her background as a biologist is just vital because she understands the mechanisms of scientific inquiry on a deep level. But her work as a science writer also gives her this incredible insight into the mechanisms of scientific communication and publishing.
And that's often where the distortion happens, isn't it?
That's exactly where it happens.
Yeah.
In the translation from the lab to the headline.
So Willingham wrote Phallacy as a necessary and sharp corrective. She saw this pervasive trend of what she calls biased evolutionary storytelling.
A storytelling that has, for centuries really, centered the male body and male agency in all the big narratives about reproduction, about progress, about power.
And it's not a new thing.
Not at all. It's a centuries-old tradition that just got codified in modern science.
So the book serves as this direct, really comprehensive challenge to the popular misunderstandings that just run rampant in the sphere of evolutionary psychology, or ev-psych.
Right. And the central thesis of the book is designed to just stop those narratives dead in their tracks. It's simple. Human social behavior.
Especially the really complex, nuanced behaviors like aggression or dominance or even our preferences.
They cannot be justified or excused by cherry-picked, selective biological examples from the animal kingdom.
And the reason that justification fails is, well, it's the sheer, just astonishing fact of biological diversity.
Exactly. Evolutionary diversity is the central truth of nature. And Willingham uses that fact to just fundamentally undermine any simplistic or hierarchical or, binary narratives about gender and mating systems.
Because if you actually look closely at nature, you don't find these easy, clean rules.
No. You find exceptions, you find conflict reversals. Magnificent chaos.
Really. So the book argues that the core error, the real fallacy at play here.
It's not just misinterpreting biology.
No, it's the symbolic weight we've attached to a specific piece of anatomy. The phallus, the erect penis, has been symbolically elevated to become the sine qua non of maleness.
And positioned as the master and arbiter of women. It's a symbolic elevation that is purely a cultural and historical construct.
And it wildly distracts from the organ's actual functional biological reality.
So what is that functional biological reality of the human penis, particularly when you put it in context with the rest of the vast animal kingdom?
Well, it is primarily an organ of gamete delivery and intimacy when we compare it to other animal intrament organs, which, believe me, we will get to.
Oh, we will.
The human version is remarkably simple. It lacks the complex hooks, the barbs, the spines, or even the bones that characterize weaponry in so many other species.
But culturally.
Mhm.
Culturally, it's become this potent avatar of masculine power that has to be protected or feared or worshipped. And that often leads to these really deep-seated anxieties.
Which immediately leads us to how that cultural bias has been systematically baked right into the scientific process itself. This distortion has to start with who is doing the research and what questions they're even asking in the first place, right?
Precisely. You can see a historical and a persistent bias in research towards male genitalia, what is sometimes called intramita.
While female anatomy vaginas, clitorises, other receptive organs, or receptomita has been systematically neglected, marginalized even.
The sources really show the depth of this neglect in, frankly, stark and embarrassing terms. If you look at the work of entomologist William Eberhard,
And this was back in 1985. We're talking 4 decades ago.
4 decades ago, he dedicated an entire book to discussing the strong active influence that females exert on the evolution of genitalia. He was arguing that the male organ evolves not just to deliver sperm,
Right.
but to negotiate and bypass female resistance or choice.
So even with that crucial early insight, researchers still haven't accumulated nearly the evidence needed about the structure, the function, and the coevolutionary role of female anatomy.
Not even close. And when female anatomy is examined, the questions they ask are so telling. The goal is often just to see if a penis will fit into it and how.
Rather than exploring its importance as, a selective mechanism in its own right.
Exactly. If you go in with a default assumption that the male organ is the active agent and the female structure is just this passive static receptacle, a simple lock for the key, you literally miss the evidence.
You don't look for the mechanisms of counter-selection or barriers or active choice because your initial assumption is that they just don't exist.
Right. In a lot of arthropod studies, researchers would routinely clear female genitalic structures using potassium hydroxide to make them transparent.
So they were literally obscuring crucial evidence about the selective pressures females were exerting through their own complexity and resistance.
Willful blindness. And that kind of willful blindness leads us directly to the most common intellectual trap laid by this biased interpretation,
The appeal to nature fallacy.
which Willingham brilliantly terms the lobster trap.
The lobster trap is such a classic move in popular commentary. We see it deployed constantly in motivational speaking and cultural critiques.
All the time. It happens when someone wants to rationalize a pre-existing human bias, usually something like aggression or hierarchy or social dominance, by finding a narrow, incomplete, and frankly, often inaccurate example from nature to support it.
And the lobster anecdote is probably the most famous version of this. The story that gets told is that lobsters have squared shoulders and they jockey for social position.
Which then forms the basis for drawing these incredibly facile, simplistic parallels to human social hierarchies, to male dominance, to the need for assertive behavior.
Right, the person telling the story focuses entirely on the squared shoulders and the posturing. That's the cherry-picked feature. But what is critically omitted? What makes the whole metaphor just collapse into absurdity?
What's omitted is the absolutely crucial context of how lobsters actually engage in social jockeying and mating.
Okay.
So, yes, they do stalk about with squared shoulders. But while they're doing that, they are simultaneously squirting urine at each other
They're squirting urine.
out of nozzles located on the sides of their heads. Lobster social dynamics rely intensely on chemical communication squirting concentrated urine into the face of a rival to establish social recognition and status.
So the moment you zoom out and realize that the critical component of lobster dominance is literally a pee squirting contest.
The entire analogy just falls apart.
Right. No self-help guru, no matter how cynical they are, is telling their followers to emulate this behavior by squirting urine at their rivals in the boardroom.
And this is the critical takeaway that the book demands we hold on to. No single species or selective example can ever offer a reliable pattern, let alone an excuse, for complex human behavior.
When people rely on these cherry-picked instances, and they reduce this complex animal behavior to a single human-readable feature.
Like, calling the urine-skirting liquid spray to sanitize it.
Right. They are stumbling right into the appeal to nature fallacy and they're mistaking description for justification.
And that appeal to nature issue is just central to the book's critique of evolutionary psychology, or ev-psych.
It's a field that, at least when it gets popularized, often relies so heavily on these selective, simplified examples to create what are affectionately known as just so stories.
Narratives that sound plausible but are almost impossible to rigorously test or falsify.
And so often, these stories misinterpret the core biological concepts they claim to uphold. Let's just take the most famous evolutionary phrase of all, survival of the fittest.
Most people hear that, and they immediately conjure an image of a contest, a winner and a loser. They think fitness means strength or power, winning, dominance over others.
Which is fundamentally a complete popular misunderstanding of the term.
It's completely wrong. Biologically, fitness has absolutely nothing to do with strength or brute power. Fitness is defined only by successful reproduction and being best adapted or best fitting to your specific current environment.
So a tiny, fragile organism that successfully transmits its DNA?
Is infinitely fitter than the largest, most dominant creature that fails to reproduce. You can be, as the book says, as fragile as a dictator's ego. But if your traits help you successfully pass on your genetic information, you are, by definition, fit.
So if we frame evolution as a contest where the goal is winning or achieving dominance, what's the intellectual consequence for a field like EvPsych?
Well, the consequence is that, as one academic contributor suggested, when evolution gets framed that way, EvPsych itself can become a philosophy for winners.
A philosophy for winners.
It allows researchers and commentators to retroactively justify every outcome, every social hierarchy, every act of aggression. It provides a perfect cover for aspirants who are seeking to perpetuate their own intellectual or social dominance.
And I think we can guess who the perceived winners usually are when the studies inevitably turn to sex and gender.
The ones doing the talking and the publishing.
It sets the stage for a self-fulfilling prophecy, a vicious cycle. Which brings us to how this system of biased interpretation actually works in the real world, how bad science gets amplified into cultural dogma.
Okay, so we need to analyze the dynamics within this system of scientific interpretation. We have a structure that's made up of several key actors.
You've got the researchers who design the studies.
Then the popular science writers who translate them, the media that sensationalizes them, and the cultural commentators who use them as justification.
And all of those actors are responding to a very clear set of incentives.
The primary incentives are provocation and simplicity. The more sensational, reductionist, or culturally resonant a claim is, the more media attention it receives.
And that's often completely regardless of the methodological rigor.
Oh, completely. We see this illustrated so dramatically in how studies about penises, no matter how flawed, receive massive global media attention.
Look at the sheer volume of press that was dedicated to the sensational stripper study, or that haptic study that used dildos.
Both studies focused entirely on the male organ and female preference. They instantly make headlines across dozens of media outlets because, well, who can resist clicking on an article about what women want from a penis for a one-night stand?
They affirm our existing cultural obsessions.
They do. Now, contrast that with the thoughtful, non-penis-centered studies, like one the book mentions that focuses on gender equality, commitment, partner-specific learning.
And technically competent genital stimulation. I mean, these studies yield genuinely useful, actionable information about sexual satisfaction and relationship dynamics.
But they receive almost no press coverage. Why? Because the findings lack that sensational provocation.
And this is the feedback loop in action. Cultural assumptions get baked directly into the scientific questions that researchers ask.
And then the media reinforces those assumptions by rewarding the most provocative answers.
The perfect recurring example of this has to be the obsession with cryptic ovulation in humans. This idea that female fertility signals are hidden.
Right. Since humans don't have the unmistakable visual signals of estrus that, a bonobo or a chimpanzee has, the prevailing biased narrative immediately assumes that the ovulator, the female, is hiding this information for nefarious reasons.
And that assumption quickly morphs into the idea that ovulation is being hidden so women can engage in cuckoldry.
Right, to fuck around, securing resources from a steady partner while seeking, quote, superior genes elsewhere.
So then the researchers construct these elaborate, often contradictory just-so stories to support this idea. The theory is that women are simultaneously hiding their fertility.
But they are also leaking these subtle cues, maybe through scent or skin tone changes or vocal pitch.
Right, to signal their availability to high-quality extra-pair partners just before ovulation, all while maintaining plausible deniability with their steady mate.
The scientific contradiction there is just staggering. They frame ovulation as this top-secret concealed event, yet also so discernible that these subtle cues can supposedly be detected and acted upon in the sensory chaos of a strip club.
This obsession with tactical female subterfuge then leads to even more bizarre conclusions, like the infamous hypothesis that the human penis has evolved a unique plunger shape.
Specifically to scour out rival semen before delivering its own.
The book points out the deeply toxic, reductionist consequence of that framing. The language of leaking, scouring, and plunging is coming dangerously close to reducing women to little more than receptive toilets for sperm competition.
And this bias isn't just theoretical. It drives demonstrably flawed research that achieves global fame. We absolutely have to zoom in on the infamous 2015 haptics study.
The dildo study.
The dildo study. It was designed to assess women's preferences for penis length and girth using what the authors call haptics.
So the researchers created 33 blue plastic three-dimensional models of erect penises. They asked participants to interact with them and state their preferences.
And the conclusion, which made global headlines, was that women preferred longer and thicker penises for a one-night stand and slightly smaller ones for long-term relationships.
Which, on the surface, seemed to confirm the male obsession with size and female preference as a driving selective pressure.
But the methodological flaws render the entire exercise almost meaningless from a scientific standpoint. Let's just look at the demographics of the 75 participants.
Okay.
Only 36 identified as heterosexual. The rest included 10 bisexual, 8 lesbian, 6 asexual, and 3 queer, plus others.
Wait, so huge segments of the survey population are statistically unlikely to have much interest in a one-night stand or a long-term relationship involving a penis, at least in the way the researchers were defining it.
Or the way the media reported it. It gets worse. A full 45% of the participants had never even had a one-night stand.
And 20% had never experienced sexual intercourse at all.
So you have a study that purports to measure preference for a sexual encounter that almost half the participants have never experienced, using a physical proxy, the dildo, to stand in for a hugely complex, intimate interaction.
And what was the incentive for participating?
The participants were paid $20 for their time. As Willingham notes, for $20 and 30 minutes of your time, you might attest to an attraction for eggplant, even if you secretly hate eggplant.
The incentive structure itself biases the results toward easy agreement or maybe even a sensational preference.
So the core question is, if the data was so obviously flawed, why did this study get such massive attention, and what was the real intention?
Right.
The real goal of this work was revealed in the paper's conclusion, which the media largely ignored. The authors suggested their findings might help explain why most men seeking surgical enlargement already have a penis in the normal range.
So the actual underlying mission was addressing men's anxieties about their penis size.
Exactly. It was an intellectual Trojan horse. It dressed up anxiety remediation as objective science, and in the process generated findings that reinforced male anxiety while simultaneously blaming women for being poor estimators of size.
This cycle where culturally resonant narratives drive the science just reinforces an archaic view of gender. The ultimate message being transmitted through the media, whether it's intentional or not,
It's always the same. Woman equals dependent weak undulator, and man equals progressive forward inventor.
and that simplistic, damaging narrative persists from earlier eras. It dates back to influential figures like Sherwood Washburn, a prominent mid-20th century physical anthropologist.
Who habitually used military language to characterize males, even baboons, as active, inventive, and driving progress, while framing females as passive, dependent, and just mere followers.
And that archaic, deeply biased framing still guides the direction of scientific questions today, leading researchers to fundamentally neglect and misinterpret the entire female side of the evolutionary story.
The essential antidote to these narrow, culturally infected narratives is the sheer, astonishing biological truth that lies just outside our anthropocentric tunnel vision.
Okay, let's turn to the true diversity of animal genitalia, because that context immediately makes the human obsession look, and I mean this in a purely biological sense, incredibly simple.
It really does. When we place the human penis into the vast continuum of animal evolution, it is in fact quite generalized. It falls squarely on the non-specific, flexible, generalized end of the complexity continuum.
It lacks the complex armature.
Right. The hooks, the spines, the bones, or bacula of so many other species. And this simplicity really reinforces the idea that evolutionarily, The human organ is made for intimacy and flexible gamete delivery, not conflict or mechanical extraction, or the intense sperm competition that is so common elsewhere.
That simplicity is immediately thrown into sharp contrast when we look at the extreme end of complexity and the sheer creativity of nature's solutions.
Let's take the humble slugs and snails, for example. They are magnificent. They're hermaphroditic, meaning they possess both male and female functions, but they don't just, swap sperm. They engage in these extraordinarily complex, choreographed mating rituals.
Sometimes forming massive mating chains, right, called daisy chains.
Exactly, of up to 20 individuals, all oriented male to female side throughout the chain as they simultaneously fertilize one another.
But the absolute showstopper of complexity has to go to the leopard slug, Limax maximus.
Well, absolutely. It is pure biological fantasy. The leopard slug dangles from a mucus rope spinning around in the air and slowly inches out this lengthy, thick, translucent blue penis from the side of its head.
And these penises can be, 7 times the slug's body length?
Yeah, imagine a 5-inch slug extending an organ up to 33 inches long. They then twist and entwine them in the air until they look like a single, glowing, bulbous unit hanging beneath the mating pair.
It's like high-stakes aerial fencing.
Conducted while dangling midair, often for hours. It just shows that sexual selection can lead to these extraordinary, almost unbelievable physical adaptations in the pursuit of successful fertilization.
Wow. And if that's intimacy, we can move straight to antagonism with the ducks.
Ducks are notorious for driving one of the fiercest evolutionary arms races in nature. Male ducks have these explosively forceful, often corkscrew-shaped penises.
They've been described as sperm-shooting ballistic missiles.
Which is pretty accurate,
Yeah.
because they're used extensively for forced copulation and can ejaculate in under a third of a second. This is a system driven entirely by conflict between the sexes, where the male is trying to force fertilization and the female is actively resisting.
And the conflict zone isn't just, the air or the pond, it's the internal anatomy, which I guess leads us to the explosive nature of the cephalopod world.
Indeed. Look at the male squid Loligopehi. It takes explosive delivery, literally. The male optimizes the effect of his spermatophores, these packets of sperm, by holding them near the female's mouth and then detonating them like a grenade. The released sperm then attach to specific receptacles. When the female lays eggs, they glide past this ballistic material and are fertilized. We see similar drama in the insect world. The rove beetle Aliochara curricula also uses explosive spermatophores, which it places deep within the female.
Which she can then burst with a little muscle contraction to ensure proper delivery.
Right.
The sheer variability from 33-inch dangling blue slugs to underwater sperm explosions, it just undermines any rigid claim about what is natural or normal for any species, including ours.
And yet, maybe the most shocking lesson is the evolutionary loss of the organ altogether. The fact that some species just discarded the penis.
The classic example being birds.
Right, about 97% of bird species use the simple and effective cloacal kiss, a seconds-long touch of the cloacae to transfer sperm. They lost the intromittent organ relatively quickly through a specific mechanism.
Embryonic apoptosis.
Programmed cell death, which gets triggered during development.
And what triggers this deletion? I find this specific mechanism fascinating because it speaks to how quickly biology can change course.
It's triggered by a single molecule, bone morphogenetic protein 4, or BMP4. This protein acts as a growth signal in many parts of the body, but researchers discovered that in birds that lack an intromitum, like chickens and quails, BMP4 kicks in at a crucial specific moment in embryonic development, reaching levels high enough to just erase the genital tubercle. The cells degenerate from the inside out, and the penile blueprint is discarded.
And the proof that this protein is the specific switch is just spectacular, isn't it?
It is. Researchers show that if they added an extra small dose of BMP4 to a duck embryo, a bird that naturally retains a large penis,
The penis disappeared.
it disappeared. And conversely, if they blocked the action of BMP4 in chicken embryos, the chickens developed full, functional penises.
It just shows how quickly these massive structural changes can occur with just a single genetic tweak. It completely upends the idea that evolutionary change has to be this slow, gradual accumulation of traits.
It really does. But the true story of the origin of the penis, for all amniotes, reptiles, birds, mammals, comes from a creature that also uses the cloacal kiss, the tuatara.
And this was a century-long biological mystery.
It was. The tuatara is an ancient reptile, often called a living fossil. It's the only living member of a lineage that boomed millions of years ago. For decades, its lack of a penis was interpreted to mean that the penis must have evolved multiple times independently in various amniote lineages.
So the prevailing view was that the tuatara just never had the blueprint to begin with.
Exactly. And that view persisted until the resolution of this century-long secret. In the early 1900s, a zoologist in New Zealand collected a magnificent series of embryos from tuatara eggs.
And these were then stored, largely forgotten, in Harvard's embryological collection for 120 years.
Until 2015, when modern researchers accessed one of those meticulously preserved embryos.
And what did the modern 3D reconstruction and imaging reveal?
They found the missing link. The tuatara embryo starts to build a penis. It develops genital swellings, just like any other amniote, a bird, a mammal, a crocodile.
But then, sometime before the tuatara hatches, the same developmental program we see in most birds, that targeted regression, erases it.
This discovery proved definitively that the penile blueprint is ancestral to all amniotes. The penis was lost via regression in the tuatara lineage, just as it was in most bird lineages. The blueprint was there all along.
It's a phenomenal scientific story that relies entirely on an almost accidental 120-year-old embryo specimen, and it completely rewrites the family tree of the penis. It forces us to reevaluate what we thought was the evolutionary baseline.
And it perfectly sets the stage for our next major point, the essential, often neglected half of the story.
The female's active, dynamic role in coevolution, which is the necessary counterbalance to all this male complexity and aggression.
Right. For far too long, the female reproductive system has been viewed as static and passive, merely the lock to the male's complex, active key. But if there's an arms race, like we see in ducks,
there must be a female countermeasure that's evolving just as fast.
Exactly. The book stresses that the female reproductive system is highly complex and dynamic, evolving rapidly to counter male tactics. In female ducks, for instance, the vaginas exhibit unprecedented structural variation.
They have complex folds and cul-de-sacs where unwelcome sperm goes to languish and die.
And specialized reverse corkscrew walls, specifically designed to unscrew or block the explosively delivered male corkscrew penis.
It sounds like a biological maze designed explicitly to frustrate male attempts at forced copulation. And the measured outcome of this anatomical defense is fascinating.
The outcome is the proof of concept. Despite the male's frequent and forceful use of copulation, these forced extra-pair copulations do not reliably translate into reproductive success for the male.
The female's internal anatomical resistance mechanism is just that effective. She controls the outcome by deciding which sperm can reach the egg.
And this concept of active female control is even more pronounced in species where females have evolved their own intromittent organs, truly reversing the traditional roles we just assume are biologically universal.
We have to talk about the cave insects, the genera Neotrogla and Afrotrogla.
These are microscopic, eyeless creatures living in caves, feeding off bat droppings. In these species, the female has evolved a gynosome.
A tube-like female penis.
Right, and she inserts this organ into the male's pouch, which is invaginated like a vagina, to suction up his sperm donation, which he receives as a seminal gift.
That is a staggering reversal of traditional selection pressure. The female is the one with the intromitum, and the male is the one with the receptacle. This just entirely upends the simple hierarchical narratives of gender roles based on genitalia.
And it's not just an isolated evolutionary quirk, it's a viable alternative strategy. We see what's called suction intromitum in many orders of mites, too, where females insert specialized copulatory tubes into the male's genital opening to harvest sperm.
So these structures appear in females across 17 different orders of mites.
Which strongly undermines the old assumption, the one prevalent in biased research, that holding and intromitting genitalia are restricted to males. Evolution is flexible. Function dictates form, not some predetermined role.
And even in seemingly coercive situations, like the intense dominance hierarchy of elephant seals, females exert choice and resistance in surprisingly ingenious ways.
Ways that leverage the very violence they're being subjected to.
Right.
Elephant seal mating systems are defined by these massive, dominant bulls maintaining large harems and constantly fighting off younger, non-dominant males.
So when a non-dominant male tries to mate with a female, she responds aggressively.
With loud, bellowing vocalizations, and physically by violently resisting and flipping sand into his face.
Why use such a risky strategy, though? The instinct might be to resist silently.
The loud vocalizing and aggressive resistance are countermeasures. They're designed not to stop the male directly, but to attract the attention of the dominant bull in the harem. The dominant male, then barrels over and engages the rival male in combat. The female is actively manipulating the social dynamics. She's using this subsequent male-male combat as a crucial sorting mechanism.
To ensure that only the strongest, most dominant male, the one who survives the challenge, is the one who mates with her. She's enforcing her choice through social engineering.
And this hidden complexity of female mate choice has crucial, life or death, real-world public health implications, especially when you're dealing with disease vectors like mosquitoes. This is where the academic study of sex really transcends the purely philosophical.
It truly is a literal life or death scenario. Many disease-carrying mosquito species, the ones that transmit Zika, dengue, yellow fever, have females that mate only once in their lifetime.
So researchers trying to curb these devastating populations attempted to use transgenic male mosquitoes to eradicate them. They introduced a gene that would kill the offspring unless an antibiotic was present.
And initially, the population dropped dramatically. It looked like a success, but then the populations rebounded unexpectedly.
And some of the offspring carrying the transgenic genes survived. The prevailing hypothesis is that female choice defeated the intervention. When the population was sparse, the females could better discern and chose the non-transgenic, wild-type males, leaving the hybrids out in the cold.
So understanding the specific cues that draw a female mosquito to prefer one male over another is currently a fundamental and poorly understood area of research, a literal black box.
And if we can unlock that black box, if we truly understood the mechanisms of why a female mosquito chooses her mate, we could design vastly more effective, targeted genetic or chemical interventions. We could potentially save millions of lives from vector-borne diseases.
This failure to prioritize the study of female cues because of ingrained bias really exposes the entire system of knowledge production, allowing cultural bias to dictate that a study on dildo size is more newsworthy.
Then fundamental, life-saving research into mosquito mate choice.
Has real, lethal consequences in the global health sphere.
And this pervasive scientific bias, centered on the phallus as this symbolic instrument of power, has deep historical roots. It's important to connect that past to dangerous modern narratives.
One of the most toxic enduring frameworks dates back to the 15th century and the publication of the Malleus Maleficarum,
The Hammer of Witches, the chilling instruction manual for the Inquisition.
The misogynistic framework established by this book was horrific, but its obsession with the male organ is particularly telling.
The primary focus of the text was establishing the ultimate authority of the church over women, and it achieved this partly through fear. Specifically, the fear that women, who were now exclusively defined as the source of witchcraft, could steal men's penises.
A crime known as castration by magic.
Right. The authors wrote that women would use glamour to make a penis disappear, or that they would steal them and nourish them in nests with oats, like baby birds. The obsession was centered entirely on protecting the penis as the ultimate indispensable symbol of masculine power. If it was lost, it meant total ruin.
And that ancient, deep-seated fear persists in a dramatic modern psychological form, Coro syndrome.
Coro, or genital retraction syndrome, is a genuine, documented psychological condition where men genuinely believe their penis has retracted into their body. This happens today, largely in West Africa and East Asia.
And it's often triggered after touching a perceived witch or sorcerer or encountering some other form of magical female influence.
It is a direct, terrifying echo of the ancient fear promoted by the Malleus Maleficarum, that women can magically steal or shrink the essential symbol of masculine identity and power.
And the intellectual equivalent of this obsession can be found in the Freudian system, which obsessively centers the phallus, interpreting nearly everything in relation to it.
It is psychological reductionism to an extreme degree. The Freudian system interprets nearly every human thought, action, or common object, hats, clothes, neck tension, buildings, objects of transport, as phallic or castration-related.
This process inflicted what Willingham describes as psychic pain and completely obscured genuine, complex behavioral drivers. It reduces the entire richness of the human experience to a single organ and the fear surrounding its loss.
The author notes that one short psychoanalytic paper she reviewed used the word penis over 100 times and phallus 60 times. It becomes an intellectual structure that's designed to be unavoidable.
This brings us back to the ultimate danger of mistaking description for justification, and the system's focus on the organ itself rather than the behavior. Let's look at that stark modern case study from Ukraine.
This is the case where a woman was allegedly being choked and raped in a public space by a man named Dmitry Yevchenko, Her husband, intervening in defense of his wife, punched the accused rapist and then used a Swiss Army knife to sever the man's penis.
And the outcome of the legal proceedings reveals the cultural obsession with the organ itself as a proxy for the man's identity.
That's the shocking part. The accused rapist, Ivchenko, faced up to 5 years in prison if he was convicted of the sexual assault. The husband, who acted in defense of his wife and under extreme duress, was charged with causing grievous bodily harm and faces up to 8 years.
Wait, a potentially longer jail time than the accused rapist.
A longer sentence for defending his wife than the sentence for the act of violence itself? It seems to put a higher value on the physical integrity of the aggressor's organ than on the trauma inflicted upon the victim.
That is the systems level critique. The husband, in his rage, viewed the penis as the weapon and the symbolic representation of the man's power. But by focusing the legal system's attention on the grievous bodily harm to the organ,
Society's legal framework overshadows the violence against the woman. The aggressive behavior, the impulse control deficits, the anger, the entitlement, the choice to commit assault, it's all driven by the human brain, not by the organ itself. The husband focused on the symbol, and the law reacted violently to the damage of the symbol.
we can contrast this toxic, phallocentric Western view with the anthropological study of the Indonesian Jerai culture. There, the perception of sex is completely decoupled from aggression and dominance.
In a community in Jerai, Indonesia, a woman was sleeping under a mosquito net when a man climbed in and attempted to rape her. She shoved him, tangled him in the net, and chased him out the window.
And the next day, when she recounted the story to other women, their reaction was key.
They laughed. They called the man's display stupid, not terrifying.
And her own words are so incredibly simple, yet profoundly insightful.
When the anthropologist asked the woman why she hadn't retaliated more aggressively, she asked this profoundly simple question. It's only a penis. How could a penis hurt anyone?
Wow.
In that culture, aggression and violence were viewed as boorish and low-status behavior. Their perception of sex was completely decoupled from violence and intimidation.
And the culture defines social value entirely outside of genitalia.
Precisely. Furthermore, the local people define feminine status not by physical features or adherence to a narrow gender role, but by expertise specifically, rice knowledge. The anthropologist was treated with a degree of social ambivalence, not because of her sex, but because she didn't know enough about the essential process of growing rice.
By defining social power, status, and competence outside of the realm of genitalia, the Jerai culture fundamentally disarmed the weaponization of the phallus.
They simply failed to perceive it as a symbol of power or fear, which allowed for a healthy, non-aggressive response to an attempted assault.
This deep dive really helps us clearly see what Emily Willingham set out to correct. It's about pulling apart the threads of biological reality and cultural assumption.
And the first thing is we have to aggressively decouple our cultural baggage, our Freudian anxieties, and our entrenched patriarchal histories from objective biological observation. The penis is, biologically speaking, an organ of gamete delivery and intimacy. It is not a psychological bomb or a weapon of war.
Second, the sheer, staggering diversity in nature, from snails dangling on mucus ropes to female-penetrating cave insects to the cloacal kiss of the tuatara.
It overwhelmingly undermines any rigid social claims about what is natural or normal for humans. The moment someone appeals to nature to justify a hierarchy, they're presenting a single, selective example that ignores the million counterpoints that exist in the evolutionary record.
And finally, the flexibility and the immense complexity of the human brain, that's our unique evolutionary feature. We have the capacity to recognize these toxic evolutionary just-so stories, whether they come from the 15th century or a popular science writer.
And crucially, we have the ability to define our own rules and structure our own societies outside of these crude biological imperatives.
Our most pressing evolutionary struggle is no longer about sperm competition or bone length. It's about impulse control, empathy, social cooperation, and challenging the flawed systems of interpretation that allow bias to masquerade as fact.
Which leaves us with a provocative thought. The complexity of animal sex has repeatedly been the mother of invention in basic science. Think about the discovery of BMP4 or the 3D imaging of that 120-year-old embryo. So if understanding why a single female mosquito chooses her mate could save millions of lives globally, what fundamental, crucial knowledge are we still missing by allowing cultural bias and sensationalism, the lobster trap, to dictate which research questions about sex and gender are asked, funded, and popularized?
That is the essential systemic question we leave you with. Our exploration today was based on the essential work, Phallacy, Life Lessons from the Animal Penis by Emily Willingham. We encourage you to read the book yourself, support the author, or borrow it from your local library.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer link in the description.
If you enjoy systems-level analysis like this, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.